Deterrence AI, the leading blog in proactive security.
Okay, so you're trying to keep your business safe in 2025, right? But the world of security is changing so fast, it can feel like you're, lost in a maze.
It really is a challenge.
And today we're diving deep into this guide we found on commercial security and trying to make sense of it all, so you can actually use it.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about, the obvious stuff like cameras and alarms, but it's really like a whole new way of looking at protecting your business.
Yeah, this guy takes a really interesting approach looking at the big picture, and it covers everything from like the latest AI surveillance technology to the importance of training your employees properly.
Yeah, and one of the things that really jumps out right away is that idea that the lines between physical and digital threats are blurred.
Yeah, that's one of the key takeaways from this section on the evolving landscape of commercial security.
Right.
It's not just about protecting your building anymore. It's about protecting your data and your systems and how those two things are increasingly interconnected.
So like a cyber attack could actually end up causing physical damage.
Exactly. We're seeing more and more of that. A hacker could disrupt a power grid or disable a security system and cause real-world chaos.
Wow. And of course, technology is at the heart of all of this.
Right. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
Like the guide talks about AI, the Internet of Things, IoT, and cloud-based systems. All of these are game changers in terms of security, but they also introduce new vulnerabilities.
Yeah. Okay, so let's break down some of these tech advancements, starting with AI-powered surveillance.
Sure.
This seems like a huge step beyond just, having security cameras recording.
It is a huge step. Traditional CCTV systems just passively record footage.
Yeah.
But AI-powered surveillance use really sophisticated algorithms to actually analyze that video feed in real time.
Okay, so what does that actually mean in practice? What can these AI systems do that regular cameras can't?
Well, for one thing, they can do facial recognition so they can identify individuals. But even more importantly, they can detect unusual behavior.
Oh, interesting.
Like someone loitering in a restricted area or trying to force a door open. They can even learn to recognize patterns that might indicate like a potential security breach in progress.
So it's not just reacting after something happens. It's more like predicting and preventing things.
Exactly. That's the key. And it's a huge advantage.
Right. And so what are the real benefits for a business that decides to implement this kind of AI surveillance?
What means faster response times. If the AI detects a threat, it can alert security personnel instantly. It also cuts down on false alarms, which can be a big problem with traditional motion sensors. You also get much better monitoring overall with automated alerts and predictive capabilities. It really strengthens your entire security posture.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about AI and physical security. Now let's switch gears to the digital side of things with this concept of cybersecurity frameworks and zero trust security.
Right.
Zero trust. That sounds pretty intense.
It is a pretty big shift in how we think about cybersecurity. The basic idea, as the guide explains it, is never trust, always verify.
Okay, so even if someone's already inside the network, you don't just assume they're supposed to be there?
Exactly. The old model was all about creating a secure perimeter around your network and then trusting anyone inside. But with so many people working remotely and accessing data from all sorts of devices, that perimeters become much harder to maintain.
Right, so you got to verify every user, every device all the time.
Exactly, and the guide lays out some of the key components of a zero trust framework. Things like multi-factor authentication, so you need more than just a password.
Right.
Role-based access control, continuous verification of users and devices, and something called microsegmentation of your networks.
Okay, microsegmentation, break that down for me.
Basically, it means dividing your network into lots of smaller, isolated sections. So if one part gets compromised, the attacker can't easily move laterally to other parts of the system.
Oh, so it's like containing the damage.
Exactly.
Got it. And the guide also mentions a bunch of established cybersecurity frameworks like NIST, CSF, ISO, TOM 7001. What are those all about?
Those are basically like blueprints for building and maintaining a really strong cybersecurity program. They're a structured approach to managing risk, implementing security controls, and making sure you're meeting all the relevant compliance requirements.
Okay, so they're like guidelines and best practices you can follow.
Exactly. They help organizations approach cybersecurity in a more systematic and comprehensive way.
Okay, moving on, the guide talks about smart access control systems. It sounds like we're moving beyond keys and swipe cards.
Definitely. IoT and cloud technologies have revolutionized access control.
So what does that look like?
We're seeing things like biometric authentication, using fingerprints, or facial recognition, mobile credentials where your smartphone becomes your key, and cloud-based management systems that give you way more control and flexibility.
So what are the real advantages of using these smart access control systems?
Well, for one thing, they're more convenient. You can have contactless entry, use your phone as a key, and manage everything remotely. But more importantly, they offer way better security. And control biometric authentication is much harder to fake than a key card.
Right.
And because these systems can integrate with other security and building management systems, you get a much more unified and effective security posture.
That makes sense. Okay, it's easy to get caught up in all the high-tech digital stuff, but the guide makes a really important point about not forgetting the basics of physical security measures.
Right. No matter how advanced your digital security is, you can't neglect the physical security of your facility.
Locks and alarms and stuff.
Exactly. The guide lists a bunch of essential physical security measures like perimeter security, so fences, gates, lighting alarm systems, security personnel, and even safe rooms or panic rooms in higher risk environments.
Right. And I like how the guide emphasizes the importance of integrating physical and digital security.
Yeah, they work best together.
So give me an example of how that integration might work in practice.
Sure, let's say you have an access control system that uses key cards to grant entry to your building. Now imagine that system is integrated with your video surveillance system. So when someone swipes their card to enter the building, the security system not only unlocks the door, but it also tags the video footage with that person's identity and the time of entry.
Wow. So you have a record of exactly who entered and when.
Exactly. And if there's ever an incident, you have that visual evidence to help you investigate.
That's really smart. Okay, so this idea of integrating all these different security systems seems to be a recurring theme in the guide.
Yeah, the idea is to create a cohesive security ecosystem where all the pieces work together seamlessly. This is what the guide refers to as integrating security systems for comprehensive protection.
Okay, so rather than having all these separate systems that don't talk to each other, you have one central platform that can manage everything.
Right, and that gives you a much clearer picture of what's happening across your entire organization. It means better monitoring, faster response times, and improved situational awareness.
Okay, so that's the ideal scenario.
Exactly.
Now, the guide also gets really practical with a section on security for businesses of different sizes, which I think is really important because a small business is going to have very different needs and resources compared to a giant corporation.
Yeah, absolutely. For small businesses, it's often about finding cost-effective solutions and focusing on those critical security measures. They might rely heavily on cloud-based services because those tend to be more affordable and scalable.
Right.
Medium-sized businesses might start to implement more comprehensive security frameworks, invest in more advanced technologies, and maybe even create dedicated security roles within their organization.
Okay.
And large enterprises usually need really sophisticated enterprise-level security solutions. They'll often incorporate AI-driven systems and have very formal risk management strategies in place. Some even operate their own security operations centers or SOCs.
Wow. So the scale of security really changes depending on the size of the business.
It does. But the underlying principle is the same. You need to regularly assess your risks and develop a strategy that's tailored to your specific needs. A one-size-fits-all approach just won't cut it.
Right. Okay, now let's talk about the future. The guide has a whole section on emerging threats in commercial security, and this is where things get kind of scary.
Yeah, the threat landscape is constantly evolving.
So what are some of the new threats businesses need to be aware of in 2025?
Well, we're seeing new vulnerabilities associated with the rollout of 5G networks, for one thing.
Okay.
And the threat from advanced persistent threats, or APTs, continues to grow. These are really sophisticated long-term attack campaigns that could be very difficult to detect and defend against.
And it seems like the attackers themselves are getting more advanced with things like AI-powered attacks.
Exactly. They're using AI to craft more convincing phishing emails, for example, and to automate various stages of their attacks.
So it's getting harder and harder to even know what's real and what's a threat.
It is. And then you've got the growing number of Internet of Things devices in the workplace. All those connected devices create more potential entry points for attackers.
Right, more devices, more vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And then the guide points to some even bigger long-term threats, like quantum computing, which could potentially break the encryption we rely on today.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
And then there's the more immediate threat of supply chain attacks, where attackers target the companies that provide goods and services to their ultimate target. And then you've got the rise of deepfake technology, which can be used for all sorts of malicious purposes.
Yeah, it's kind of overwhelming when you think about all the different ways attackers are trying to get in.
It is. And that's why it's so important for businesses to stay informed and be flexible in their approach to security.
Right, you have to constantly adapt. Okay, so the guide also gets into industry-specific security considerations because obviously a bank is going to have very different security concerns than a retail store or a hospital.
Absolutely, different industries face different risks and have different regulatory requirements. Financial institutions, for example, deal with highly sensitive data, so they have to be incredibly focused on data protection and fraud prevention.
Right.
Healthcare organizations have to prioritize patient privacy because of iParrot, and they also have to protect all those connected medical devices from being hacked.
Makes sense.
Manufacturing companies have to worry about securing their industrial control systems and protecting their intellectual property. Retail businesses need to protect point-of-sale systems and customer data.
Right.
And energy and utilities companies have a huge responsibility to protect critical infrastructure.
So basically every industry has its own unique security challenges.
Exactly. Now, you can't just take a generic approach to security. You have to understand the specific risks and regulations that apply to your industry.
Okay, speaking of regulations, let's talk about compliance and regulatory requirements because this can be a real headache for businesses.
It can be, but it's really important. The guide lists a bunch of key regulations and standards like GDPR, CCPA, PCI, DSS, IPA, and SOX. And these aren't just bureaucratic hurdles. They actually play a big role in strengthening your overall security posture.
So compliance can actually make your business more secure.
Exactly. By complying with these regulations, you're forced to put certain safeguards and processes in place, which makes you a less attractive target for attackers.
Right. So it's not just about avoiding fines, it's about actually improving your security.
Exactly. And the guide outlines some key steps organizations can take to ensure they're meeting these requirements, like staying up to date on the latest regulations, assessing their current compliance status, implementing the necessary controls and processes, and conducting internal audits to make sure they're staying on track.
Okay, so it's an ongoing process. You can't just do it once and forget about it.
Exactly. You have to be vigilant and constantly adapt to changes in the regulatory landscape.
Okay, we've talked a lot about technology and systems, but the guide rightly emphasizes the importance of the human element in all of this with employee training and security awareness programs.
Right. Human error is still a huge factor in security breaches.
So you can have the best tech in the world, but if your employees don't know what they're doing, you're still vulnerable.
Exactly. That's why investing in employee training and raising security awareness is one of the most effective things any organization can do.
So what makes for a good security awareness program?
The guide recommends regular training sessions, simulated phishing exercises, clear security policies, and ongoing reinforcement of key security principles.
Like what kind of things should employees be trained on specifically?
Things like how to report security incidents, how to identify and avoid phishing, and social engineering attacks the importance of strong passwords and multi-factor authentication, safe internet and email practices, mobile device security, how to handle sensitive data, and even basic physical security awareness.
Wow, that's a lot to cover.
It is, but it's all really important.
Okay, now let's get down to brass tacks. How much is all this going to cost, and how do you justify the expense? The guide has a section on cost-benefit analysis of security investments.
Right.
And this is where things get tricky because it can be hard to measure the ROI of security, especially if you haven't had any major incidents.
It can be challenging, but it's important to think about security as an investment, not just a cost.
Okay, so how do you do a proper cost-benefit analysis for security investments?
The guide recommends considering the potential financial impact of various security incidents. So what would it cost you if you were hit with a ransomware attack, for example?
Right.
You need to assess your current security posture and identify any gaps, estimate the potential costs of those incidents occurring, calculate the costs of the proposed security measures, and then evaluate both the short-term and long-term benefits of those investments.
Okay, so it's about weighing the costs of doing nothing against the potential costs of a breach.
Exactly, and don't forget to factor in the costs of regulatory compliance as well.
Okay, so let's say you've made these security investments. How do you know if they're actually working? The guide talks about measuring and evaluating security effectiveness.
Right. It's not enough to just put security measures in place. You have to track their effectiveness and make adjustments as needed.
So how do you do that?
Well, you need to establish key performance indicators, or KPIs, to track how well your security measures are performing. These might include things like the number of security incidents that were successfully prevented, the mean time to detect, and the mean time to respond to incidents, the results of compliance audits, and even the scores your employees achieve in security awareness training.
Okay, and what kind of methods can businesses use to actually assess their security effectiveness?
There are several methods mentioned in the guide, like penetration testing, where you basically try to hack into your own systems to find weaknesses.
Right.
Vulnerability scans to check for known flaws in your systems. Red team exercises, which are like more comprehensive. Attack simulations, security audits, and incident response drills to test your team's preparedness.
Got it. So it's about constantly testing and evaluating your defenses.
Exactly, and it's an ongoing process. The threat landscape is constantly changing, so you need to be able to adapt and improve your security posture over time. This is what the guide refers to as continuous improvement.
Right. Okay, finally, the guide wraps up with a look at future trends in commercial security beyond 2025. What are some of the big things on the horizon?
Well, we're likely to see even more sophisticated AI and machine learning being used for predictive security.
Okay.
Physical and cybersecurity systems will become even more tightly integrated. Blockchain technology might be used more widely for secure transactions and identity management, and there will be even more focus on data privacy.
And probably new threats we haven't even thought of yet?
Absolutely. The threat landscape is constantly evolving, so businesses need to be prepared to adapt and stay ahead of the curve.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
Okay, so wrapping up, the key takeaway from this deep dive is that commercial security in 2025 is about taking a comprehensive and adaptive approach. It's about integrating your physical and digital security measures, leveraging technology strategically, and making sure your employees are well-trained and aware of security threats. You have to stay informed, constantly assess your security posture, and be ready to adapt as new threats emerge.
And that brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. Given all these emerging threats and the increasing sophistication of attacks, how will businesses need to rethink their security strategies in the years to come to stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that every business leader needs to be asking themselves.
Absolutely. The future of security is about being proactive and constantly evolving your defenses.
Okay, well, that's our deep dive on commercial security in 2025. Thanks for listening,
Thanks for having me.
and we'll see you next time.
See you then.